We have our honorable guest here, Miss Happy Ralinala. Thank you so much for coming through. I'm just going to read a profile. Happy Ralinala is a director of Barclays Group. Her last executive role was managing executive of private and wealth banking segments of Barclays Africa Group, where she held numerous senior roles, including managing executive of business banking South Africa. One of her many successes includes being voted the best SME bank in South Africa by Capital Finance International. While she was managing executive of business banking South Africa and Barclays Africa Group. She holds a master in philosophy in international business, masters of business administration, and won Barclays Global Business Woman of the Year award in 2015. There's a lot, and we would love to just hear more. Over to you, Natasha.
Sorry. I just want to say we're so privileged to have you here. And Happy is one of those real trailblazers for women. So I just want to acknowledge you. She actually had a bit of a personal crisis, but she still came for us. So thank you. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. Can we not talk about it? What's that? It's a crisis that breaks me down. So can we just pretend it doesn't exist? Because I'm here.
Hey, thank you very much for joining us. So good morning, beautiful ladies and gent. Is it still around? Yeah. And gent. So today's conversation is not about titles. It's not about governance frameworks and policies and the written rules or board packs. It's about something far more elusive and far more powerful. It's about the unwritten rules of the boardroom. And how do we influence those? The kind that we don't get taught in our MBA programs or any undergrad, the kind that only you would learn by entering the boardroom, paying attention and being present. So we know about the triple P from King 1 up until King 4 and now King 5 on our heels. But today we talk about our triple P, power, presence, and positioning. These are not only just buzzwords, but they are strategic currencies. And to guide us through this breakthrough moment, we've been joined by someone who has mastered the art of silent influence, who understands not just what's said in the boardroom, but also what is not said. Please join me in welcoming someone who pulls back the curtain on the boardroom dynamics today, Miss Happy Ralinala.
Thank you.
So without any further ado, we have our topic that we have decided on. And we're going to talk about breaking through the boundaries of boardrooms. So my first question to you, as Happy, is in your experience in boardrooms, what are the biggest unspoken rules that you've come across that no one tells you about or warns you about, but everybody expects that you're supposed to know?
I think the unspoken rule, which then gets to be a silent rule, is the issue of independence and independence of mind. You know, we talk about independence, but the independence of mind. And when you talk about the independence of mind, really talks to when, what, and how. And really talks to when to speak, what to say, but mostly, how do you, and especially as a woman, influence in the boardroom, outside the boardroom, and really talks to one, the language, the body posture, But most of all is how do you then bring all of these together in a very succinct way that does not change you as a woman. The challenge with everybody is that everybody wants to fit in. Everybody has had what it needs to be in the boardroom. Actually, one of the key examples I can tell you is that everybody walks into that boardroom wanting to make an impact. I've arrived here first day, I must say something, and sometimes you just come in and listen. Because listening, especially in your first day in a board appointment, it's for you to take in, understand the nuance in the environment, understand the table dynamics, because there are board table dynamics. There are people who've got strong voices, there are people who've got soft voices, and you do not have to be loud. You do not have to lose yourself. You don't have to impress anybody. You just have to come in and be authentically you, knowing that you've brought the expertise, the skills, but mostly the boardroom environment is a learning environment too. What you knew yesterday might not apply the next day because things change. And when I was here and I just walked in, I heard the previous speaker talking about change. And change is fast pacing the institutions. We're in a digital age. So therefore, you just have to come in and just be authentically you.
Oh, thank you so much. I was happy for that. So you've touched on how we can walk into a boardroom confidently present and not say a word and own the space. On that, what does the executive presence actually look like in practice?
So the executive presence, firstly, is the one that understands the two dynamics. There's an executive, there's a board, there's other stakeholders. So when you just talk about those three, your stakeholder is your shareholder, your stakeholder is the public, the stakeholder. The executive presence is the EQ. We always want to bring in the skill and be technical about everything. But sometimes it's the emotional intelligence that we need to bring into the room. But also it is the AQ, the quotient for you to be able to adapt. That sometimes as an executive, the board acknowledges that you are an SME. But sometimes the board is your principal. And that these relationships interchangeably influence each other. But what most of us, and I'll say it because it's my learning for me too, is self-development is a big part of what executives need to take on. What books you read? What do you listen to? And some of the stuff we listen to are not the stuff that builds. It's the stuff that fuels our egos. And the ego does not exist in the boardroom, especially as an executive. But also as a board, it is this partnership that comes through. And earlier on I spoke about knowing when to speak, what to say. And sometimes you don't have to speak the whole meeting. But whatever you would have said at a specific point in time becomes impactful, becomes meaningful, because you're not competing to speak, but you're listening attentively to be able to put all things together. And executives are also teachers to board because they're SMEs. On the other side, the board also has a responsibility to do that.
So what we're hearing is change, adaptability, and self-development, and that executive management and board members and other stakeholders, even the staff, there's a partnership streaming through. So as a practicing company secretary for 26 years, I've seen that very often directors confuse being invited to the table and having power at the table. What's your view on that?
I think the issue of being invited on the table and the issue of the power in the table talks to who invites you on the table. For what agenda do they invite you to the table? But mostly, your association with that table, right? So who invites you to the table? I'll talk to the trends maybe that we see around. There are circles and cliques of board members, tight-knit, that move in sync with one another, right? And always what I question is the independence of those boards. But secondly, it's not also about the invitation, it's about how you raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, and for what do you raise your hand for? So there is an issue of an intent, because the intent talks to what is it when I get there that I would like to achieve? Does this align with me, my values? But most of all, I think you all know that when you are when the board invites, it has to invite diverse set of skills, because it is an expectation from the board to have a specific composition for a specific industry, for a specific. So therefore, you being invited to the table does not mean you need to oblige. It doesn't mean you have to fit in. But also you need to know your worth. You'll find somebody who's been around here, who've been around as a first-time board member, or even as an experienced board member. You just have to find a way of commanding your space. But that starts with self. Absolutely. It starts with self-awareness, which is a key skill, a key trait that each and every leader must have, that you're just self-aware, and it just talks to emotional intelligence. So at the center of everything, it's just the core that says, how do you go and want to give oxygen to a big institution or organization when you yourself lack the very same oxygen?
Absolutely profound. I was happy. So we see some subtle power plays that happens in the boardroom. And to your earlier point, we have clickism in boards, and they move around like it's a waltz, even if they haven't prepped, it's just in step. How would you advise leaders and board members to respond without losing grace or ground?
Please repeat yourself.
So we have subtle power plays in the boardroom, and from time to time, the person or the director or the board member outside of the clique wants to respond to the observation. How would you advise the outside board member responds or shows up without losing grace or ground?
So there's a book called Art of War. Right? The Art of War. I think it talks to the EQ and the ability to be able to engage at a certain level. So one of the key traits that a board member need to have is the trait of influence. You have an ability to engage board members one-on-one. You have an opportunity to be able to get to know the individuals better. And I would encourage that sometimes when you identify something, you don't walk away from it. It also talks to the timing, the place, who, and when. We often, especially in a young age, and I'll talk about in my young age specifically, and I really had a benefit of starting to be a board member from a school. So when you participate from a school side of things, as a parent, you also have this intent of wanting to make the school do well. My child is here, you invested, right? So you want the school to do well, but you also have parents who also are very senior, they have authority, and at that time I was looking at it from also an inclusive environment. An inclusive environment that says teachers are very influential. I'd like to see Black teachers at the school because children look up to their teachers, they become their role models. So therefore, how do you then at that time start introducing a narrative that says, can we please start introducing Black teachers in this school so that my daughter can have a role model? It took me a session where I went to each and every board member, one by one, coffee. Let's talk about what it would mean. But also just to share the changing population around the school. So if this is a private school and you want to attract this changing population, you must also talk to the needs of this population. So you can't just switch on, but you have to be tactical around what you want to achieve. It really is the art of war. You just don't open yourself vulnerably to a space where you don't know what response you're going to get back. Right?
Yeah.
And most responses kill your soul. I can tell you, because nobody has a responsibility of protecting you. You have a responsibility of protecting yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what is it that you can absorb and what is it that you can't absorb. What is it that you can tolerate and what is it that you can tolerate. You know what's a deal maker for you and what's a deal breaker for you. And as a board member, and especially as a female, you need to know what are deal makers. You know, one of the benefits I had, I've transitioned in my career. I've had many careers. Maybe I share this with you. I qualified as a nurse. Yes, I qualified as a nurse. At 21, I was a registered nurse. I'd qualified from Baragwanath Hospital. 1994 happened. I saw an opportunity for a change because 1994 presented opportunities for Black people at the time. So therefore, that change came through. And that change meant that I go into financial services. I'll talk about that transition. And the health finances I went to was healthcare financing, medical aid. That because I had a healthcare skill, right? I had a medical skill. So I transitioned. But I then get an opportunity when I had moved and I'd worked for Discovery. I then worked for Tebi. I joined Discovery when they were small. When they just started, Adrian used to be on the first floor. We used to be on the ground. You'll meet him coming up and down at the time and all of that. But let me move away from that. Then I transitioned to medical, to F&B. And I remember coming back and I said to my husband, I've been invited to join F&B. An executive search company had called me. Can you believe? He says, for what? And I say, I'm going to listen to them. I want to. Healthcare and banking, what are you going to do? You know, he asked me and genuinely asking me, hi, what is it that you want to do now? You know? But the reality is the transitioning of one from being what you've been yesterday needs fuel. Proper psychological fuel. It talks about how do you best equip yourself, because the war is not won physically.
Yeah.
We are in a psychological, mental, and emotional, because once you lose your confidence at that moment in time, it takes a lot for you to do a comeback. That's the art of war. So you have to capacitate yourself with those skills. And on a day-to-day basis, tell yourself, I am going to win. And I know, but also it talks to you about how you plan. And sometimes the plan does not work. And sometimes the plan does not succeed. But doesn't mean that the plan is failure. It just says it did not work at a point in time. And that point in time talks to the strength that you would have built internally.
Thanks, Safi, for that. So, coming to mind on my side is that a boardroom setup is a lot of frames. So you remember back in the day when they made movies, you know, there was different frames. And it's not based on fact. It's really us looking at ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to show up and position ourselves appropriately. And guess what? We could always just rely on self. So I really want to ask the next question. Does the game or the rules of the game in a boardroom change when we go into the golf course and when we engage via WhatsApp, when we do on phone calls? Does the same rules apply?
The reality is that we're all human beings, right?
Yeah.
So that you can't discount. And as human beings, we want to connect. But also, corporate governance does allow a point where you reflect with another board member of whether did I hear you well? Is this what is intended for? From which point were you coming from when you said that? Right? But over familiarity with one another does blur. Honestly, it does blur the independence because we now are in sync with one another. We talk quite often with one another and we've become friends. It does, you know. But how do I call you to order or caution you on something when there is this over-familiarity? And sometimes, though, it takes a specific skill. Even when over-familiarity exists, that you are able to, because it doesn't mean over-familiarity means that you would not caution or call each other to order, but it says, what's my maturity as an individual to be able to deal things? Because also Boardroom Dynamics says you have to have a cordial relationship with your fellow board members. There shouldn't be any I want to say suspicion on the intent of the conversations. You have to trust the intent. It is when you have an instinct and doubt, and one of the key things that we have as women is intuition. I call it, people call it sixth sense, I call it my eighth sense. Because honestly, in environments where my eighth sense had told me something, it is real, it is tangible, it is that loud voice And when that loud voice, everybody says it's a soft voice. It is a loud voice because it comes through when you are quiet, when you are sleeping, when you are in your space. Listen to it. And you know it as a woman, it's that loud voice. So in short, I think it's very, very important that there's a clear distinct around what we talk about, where we talk about things, and how we talk about them. Clear distinction. I've had somebody telling me that they were sitting at a coffee shop, and in a coffee shop, they had a whole board conversation with two people that were talking there.
Oh.
All right? And it really talks to when, where, and how. And I like the where, when, and how all the time because it becomes that just one distiller for you in anything.
Yeah.
When to speak, when to do things, and how to do it, and with who, and what. All the time. If you just put it like that, then you are able to then sense check yourself, sense check others, but also be able to trust your own judgment. You know? Because when you make a decision and a judgment, it mustn't haunt you. You must be at peace, even if it gobbles you one day, because boards are not safe, right? That you need to know. Because the boards are not safe because also the boards talk to at a specific time, right? And what you knew then. And then everyone else comes and says in hindsight. But there was no hindsight at that present moment.
Absolutely.
It didn't exist.
Yes.
Hindsight at that present moment, it didn't exist. The biggest learning, and I'm still trying to distill, I just haven't had time. I don't know when it's going to happen. I want to go back and listen even to the Zondo Commission itself, right? Because the questions were, in hindsight, would you have? But what I had at that moment in time, I made a decision. And those decisions are human being decisions that are also influenced by my own personal emotions and psychological state at that moment in time. So these things are much trickier. I had an opportunity to attend a board governance program with Oxford last year, Oxford University or University of Oxford, one of the two. And it's a bank board governance program, I put it like that. And the bank governance program had to look at the cases of Credit Suisse. And it's one of the biggest cases, and I'm going to challenge you to just go and read it. It challenged me in a number of ways on decision making. And if I was in that position, what would I have done? What would I have made as a board member, as an executive, as a partner of some sort, as an associate of the institution, but also as a community in that country, you know? So, and the issue of board activism happens every day, everywhere. We've seen it in South Africa coming through. You've seen environmentalists challenging financial institutions about the decisions that they make. So it is what you read, when you read it, what you subscribe to, but who are your friends? The quality of the conversations you have with your peers also changes how you play the game. Because you hear their perspectives, you hear even this environment, it's a dynamic environment. One of the key things possibly should be, how do we scale this environment? How do we invite more people on the table? Maybe we don't start these conversations with people who are executives. What's the conversation that happens at managerial level when somebody just runs a division? Because a division is a company within a company. A division is a company within a company. But also what most importantly also is that, yes, they say the board owns the culture together with management. Can you imagine if everything had to be bottom up and the staff could say the culture we want? Not the culture that's designed by leadership. Yes, you have an ideal culture, but there is a culture that everyone else think would be an ideal culture for this institution, because one, they touch all your stakeholders, they touch your customers, which are the key, but most of all, staff are key also shareholders of the business. So it is all those dynamics that when you then start looking at entities, you have to look across.
Yeah. So how are we doing for time, Judah? Oh my God. Okay, so you've shared so much wisdom and your experience from a nurse to healthcare and finance, and then into finance and banking and Oxford and back. What grounds you? And you mentioned earlier on that we have to be intentional about our objective, the purpose, and that has to be aligned with our values and beliefs.
Yep.
So please share with us what do you have to drink or do or daily just to make sure that you keep yourself honest.
I was raised by very, very dynamic women. Very. Both my maternal and my paternal grandparents, I've had the best grandmothers. The best gift I've ever had. But also I've had the great mother. My mother was a taxi driver, first woman taxi driver in Soweto. But my maternal grandmother was so grounded, had humility, had unmovable faith on things. She believed. She had a quiet influence in her house. And I'll give you one of the examples. My grandfather used to say, after a function, a traditional function, slaughtering or something that would have happened. And then my grandfather, when he's sober, not that he used to drink, but I'm just saying, when he is sober and he realizes what a dynamic woman this, and he will say it. And we were grandchildren. That at that time, it didn't mean anything to me. But now reflecting back, then I realized my grandfather used to say, "Hey, umama," this is my grandmother. Umama is such a gifted, intelligent woman. The only thing I just said to her is that we must do this. And in her own way, she puts it all together and she does it and everything, And if it was a traditional function and everybody came here and said, "How, Mtembu, this was amazing, this was beautiful." I didn't lift an inch. I didn't do anything. But she put it all together. And she was reserved, she was quiet, but she just made that home homely in her own way. Now, in hindsight, I realize what a dynamic woman she was. But the most important thing, she taught us to pray. She taught us to have faith in God in an amazing way. In an amazing way. My paternal grandmother had moved from KZN, a place called Glenkotandi, to come up to Joburg after her first challenging marriage. She picked up her bags, came to Joburg, and to come and look for better opportunities. And I need to tell you that my grandmother she used to operate a computer where she used to work. And she'll come and say, everybody who comes from overseas are looking for Betty. And they come in because I do a computer. And I used to think, at that time, remember me too? I didn't know about a computer. Even when I qualified as a nurse, there was no computer in the hospital. Yes, when I went to Sizwe, the first thing I had to learn is to use what you would call a Siemens Nixdorf computer. That was the mainframe stuff. So she did. And she retires in 93, 94, around there. Having been operating that, I come from pioneering women in their own right. But they were not loud about it. They were quiet about it. But most of all, they were community builders. In any other way, they just belonged into a community of women, worked with the community of women. And that's what grounds me. What grounds me is my faith in God, believing that everything that happens, God will carry me through. It doesn't matter whether it is. My faith holds me together. And that's the faith that held the three women I identified with.
Amen. Amen. I'm gonna have one last question, Judith, if that's okay. So, with your three amazing women that you've learned from, was there any point in time that you wanted to challenge legacy thinking without being called a difficult child or a troublemaker?
And I want to, so I was not, I'm the eldest from my mother. So I was not a troublemaker. I towed the line. But towing the line, I learned a lot. Because you are expected to lead. Maybe I'll share with you the bigger lessons from my relationship, especially with my mother. As a taxi driver, my father dies, gets stabbed. My mother is a taxi driver. And my mother has to go and work. And she has these little children that she needs to leave in the house and go where? To first load in the morning, second load in the morning, right? Can come through during the day, quickly check out and drive back and everything. But there was also a community of other mothers around and really grandmothers who would come and check on us and everything. I was brought up with these sisters who used to create chaos. So I became a parent very early. And then my mother would come in and say, why is there a mess in the house? Why is the house not clean? Why is that not done and everything? Then I'll go in and say, no, she did it. She did it. She did it. And my mother would look at me and say, I left you in charge here. I left you in charge here. That leaving me in charge made me understand what accountability means, what responsibility means, but also how to lead and manage our household, in which also is what I have seen with my girls. Yeah. My oldest girl is a parent to the other two. I have three daughters, and amazing three daughters, amazing gifts that God had given me, in which also continue to challenge me as a parent to reflect about what type of a parent am I. But mostly, what do I teach them? And also to acknowledge that they may and may not accept what you teach them. You know, a story of a preacher's child. That the world looks at a preacher and think the child is also a preacher, and yet a child is just a child,
Yeah.
like any other ordinary children.
Yeah.
But the reality is that you then get to learn. But I want to share one last thing with you. I changed to be an executive, and I have these children that I have, and stress and everything that we do follows us home, right? And you walk into the house, there are homeworks to be done, there's stuff to be done, there's everything that needs to happen. And you walk in, you want them to do the homework and quickly do everything because you still want to go and open your laptop.
Yeah.
Because we take work home, right? Can I advise that there's only one job that you have as a parent, is parenting. You don't have a teaching skill. And if there is a way that you can outsource that teaching to someone else, let them teach your child. Yours is to create memories with your child. The trauma you bring home when you just say, do that homework, repeat 10 times 20 and everything. And you're just not skilled to do it and you don't know how. But also with familiarity, then you get into tricks with one another. But that's not the memories you want to have with your child, right? You want to have a time which is quality time. When my mom is here, she hugs me, she loves me, she tells me how important am I, how beautiful I am, not the one that says, do that, do that, do that, do that, right? It's the first thing I learned, and I thought to myself, I must choose whether I bring animosity at home or I build a relationship with the girls. They can't see me with this horrible mother, because when I walk in, then the environment changes.
Yeah.
Choices we make.
Wow.
We have some online questions. Cassandra says, how much does governance differ in private entities versus listed entities?
I would say not much. Governance is governance. Governance is about doing things in the interest of the institution and its stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's all in the interest of the entity and its stakeholders, listed or not listed. An NPO, a school, my little company, in the interest of this legal entity. So it differs nowhere at all. And governance is conscience.
Thank you so much for that answer. Mabe Kwana says, I have noticed that lately big companies are retrenching as a result of competitive moves to enhancing technology. Is this something boards are encouraging, or is this a sign that they have failed to prepare for the future?
So it depends. Retrenchments have happened over a long time. We've seen them in the past. The issue of change and relevance is an issue of strategy. And strategy is about choices you make, what to do and what not to do at a point in time. So all these things get influenced by a lot of moving parts. You could have a strategy, which is a plan that you think is solid, waterproof, intact. Bang! PTY Ltd comes through, throws you under the water. It really, the entities who do not succeed or fail, not because they had not done something about it, but somebody comes with a competitive advantage, and which becomes a competitive advantage between what had stayed at liberty and what discovery became.
Yeah.
if you just know how discovery came out of liberty, you can go and read that. Discovery came out of liberty, and it's just a choices that may happen at a point in time.
The last question said, well, it's a comment, I think. The attendees are very grateful for this honesty and transparency with which Happy is sharing very valuable lessons. They're clapping, she says. But clapping online, thank you for reminding us that our feminine strength, personal mastery, is the real superpower in leadership. I think we don't have any questions in the room. I think we can close. Are you comfortable that we close here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. This was really fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.